Michelle Obama was used to long nights. For years, her life had been built on routines that left little room for rest. As a single mom, she had learned how to balance her son's school, her part-time job at a diner, and her extra hours driving people around town. Most nights ended with her body aching and her eyes heavy, but she kept going. She had to. Her son Michael depended on her, and that thought gave her strength. The city streets glistened with rain that Friday evening. Streetlights reflected off the wet pavement, painting the world in a blur of yellow and silver. Michelle gripped the steering wheel of her old car, her heater blowing warm air against the chill that crept through the windows. She was almost done for the night. Just one more ride, she told herself. And then she would go home to Michael, who would be waiting with his books scattered across their small kitchen table. Her phone pinged, startling her. Another request. She sighed, leaning back in her seat for a moment. She wanted to reject it, but the payment would cover groceries for the weekend. With a tired smile, she tapped accept. Little did she know that single choice would change her entire life. The address led her to a tall, glowing building in the heart of the city. Music spilled out as the doors opened and closed, laughter and chatter echoing into the rainy night. Wealthy men and women in sharp suits stood under umbrellas, their cars lined up to collect them. Michelle parked her modest car near the entrance, suddenly feeling out of place among the polished black sedans. Then she saw him, Steve Jobs, the CEO everyone read about in magazines and business news, stumbled out of the glass doors. His face, usually sharp and confident in photographs, was softer tonight. His eyes glazed, his steps unsteady. A colleague tried to steady him, but he waved them off with a stubborn hand. Michelle blinked. Was she really about to drive the most powerful man in the city? He spotted her car, or rather his phone guided him there. With a clumsy movement, he opened the back door and slid in, his suit jacket damp from the rain. The smell of expensive cologne mixed with alcohol filled the small space. Michelle adjusted her mirror, catching a glimpse of him leaning against the seat. "Good evening," she said gently, trying to sound professional. Steve chuckled, his voice low. "Evening? It feels like midnight." "It is almost midnight," she replied softly, pulling the car into traffic. The rain tapped steadily against the windshield as she drove. For a few minutes, silence filled the car, except for the occasional sigh from her passenger. Michelle kept her focus on the road, though her heart beat a little faster than usual. It wasn't every day she drove someone like Steve Jobs. Out of nowhere, he spoke. "Do you ever wonder why people like me end up like this? Surrounded by people, but still empty?" His words slurred slightly, but there was honesty in them. Michelle hesitated, unsure if he expected an answer. "I think everyone feels lonely sometimes," she said finally, "no matter how much money or success they have." He shifted, his eyes half open, studying her through the mirror. "You have kind eyes," he murmured, almost like a child sharing a secret. Then he leaned back again, closing his eyes. The words surprised her. She wasn't used to compliments, especially not from strangers. Her life was filled with responsibilities, not flattery. For a moment she wondered what made him say that. Was it the way she looked at him without judgment? Or maybe he was just too drunk to know what he was saying. As she drove deeper into the city, Michelle's thoughts wandered. She imagined the kind of home a man like Steve lived in. Grand, spacious, filled with everything money could buy. She wondered if he had a family waiting for him. Someone to take care of him when nights like these ended. Then she remembered his earlier words about being surrounded by people but still feeling empty. Maybe, despite all his wealth, he was just another soul searching for connection. The car finally pulled into a long driveway that led to a mansion. The gates opened automatically, and Michelle felt a lump in her throat. The house ahead looked like something from a magazine. Tall windows, shining lights, and gardens that stretched endlessly. She couldn't help but compare it to her small apartment, where Michael's drawings covered the fridge and the sound of neighbors' televisions leaked through thin walls. For a second, she wondered what life would be like if she lived here, but she quickly shook the thought away. That wasn't her world. Her world was Michael, school lunches, and long nights driving strangers home. Steve stirred as the car came to a stop. "Home," he whispered, almost as if reminding himself. He struggled with the seatbelt, and Michelle leaned over, helping him unclip it. She noticed the tired lines on his face, the weariness hidden beneath his powerful image. For the first time, he didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a man who had lost something important. "Careful," she said softly. as he tried to get out. He leaned on the door for support, nodding slowly. Before walking away, he turned to her. His eyes, though heavy, met hers for a brief moment. "Thank you for treating me like a person tonight, not like a headline." Michelle didn't know what to say. She simply nodded, offering a gentle smile. And then he was gone, disappearing into the glowing lights of the mansion. Driving away, Michelle's chest felt strangely heavy. It had been just another ride, she reminded herself. Tomorrow she would wake up, pack Michael's lunch, and go on with her day. People like Steve Jobs didn't cross paths with people like her. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted inside her. At home, Michael was waiting at the kitchen table, his eyes lighting up when she walked through the door. "Mom, you're late," he said, holding up his math homework. Michelle smiled, brushing the rain from her coat. "I had one last ride," she explained, kissing his forehead. "But I'm here now." She didn't mention Steve. It felt like a secret too strange to share. Instead, she sat with her son, helping him with numbers, her mind still replaying the quiet words from her passenger. "You have kind eyes." That night, long after Michael had fallen asleep, Michelle lay awake staring at the ceiling. She told herself it was just a moment, a passing encounter. Yet deep inside she felt that life had just opened a door she never knew existed, and though she didn't know it yet, that rainy night was only the beginning of a story that would change everything. The next morning, Michelle Obama woke up early as she always did. The sound of rain was gone, replaced by sunlight streaming through the thin curtains of her small apartment. She stretched her tired arms and turned to see her son Michael still asleep, his small hands curled under his cheek. For a moment she simply watched him, grateful for the quiet peace of morning. She had almost forgotten about the unusual ride from the night before. Almost, but as she prepared breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, she kept remembering the way Steve Jobs had looked at her, the way he had said, "You have kind eyes." It was strange. Why did those words stay with her? She shook the thought away. It didn't matter. That was his world, and she belonged in hers. After breakfast, she walked Michael to school. He skipped beside her, his backpack bouncing. "Mom, do you think one day we can go to the Science Museum again?" he asked, his eyes shining with excitement. "Of course," Michelle replied, though she knew the tickets were expensive. "We'll plan it soon." She kissed him goodbye at the school gates and hurried back home to get ready for her shift at the diner. The day passed as usual, serving coffee, carrying plates, smiling at customers even when her feet ached. By evening, she had nearly forgotten about Steve Jobs, until the knock on her door. Michelle frowned, wiping her hands on a towel. Hardly anyone visited her. She opened the door and froze. Standing outside, holding 2 cups of coffee, was Steve himself. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. His suit was perfectly pressed this time, his hair neat, his eyes clear. He smiled a little awkwardly, as if unsure whether she would slam the door in his face. "Good evening," he said gently. I wanted to thank you for last night." Michelle blinked, words failing her. How did you?" "Your car app," he explained quickly. "It listed your first name. Took me a while, but I wanted to find you. I hope you don't mind." He held out the coffee like a peace offering. "I thought maybe you could use a break." Michelle hesitated. This was unbelievable. A CEO standing in front of her small apartment with coffee? But his expression was sincere, not proud or arrogant. Carefully, she stepped aside. "Come in, I suppose." Steve entered, looking around the modest space. The walls were plain, except for Michael's colorful drawings taped across the fridge. A stack of schoolbooks lay on the table beside a cracked mug. The place was small, but it felt warm, filled with love. "You have a nice home," Steve said softly, though it was clear he was comparing it to his mansion, but his tone carried no pity, only respect. Michelle raised an eyebrow. "This is probably the smallest home you've been in for years." He laughed, taking a sip of his coffee. "Maybe, but it feels real." Just then the front door burst open and Michael came running in. "Mom, I finished my homework." He stopped in his tracks when he saw Steve. "Who's this?" Michelle hesitated. "This is Steve. He's a friend." Steve crouched down, smiling warmly. "Nice to meet you, Michael." The boy studied him curiously. "Are you rich?" he asked bluntly. Michelle gasped. "Michael!" But Steve only chuckled. "Yes, I guess I am. But you know what? Money doesn't make you good at math. Want me to help you with your homework? Michael's eyes widened. Really? Okay. He pulled out his math notebook, and before Michelle knew it, Steve was sitting at their little kitchen table helping her son work through fractions. Michelle stood in the corner, watching in disbelief. Steve Jobs, the man on magazine covers, was explaining simple equations to her 9-year-old son, like it was the most important task. The days that followed were unlike anything Michelle Obama had ever known. For years, her world had been small and predictable. Work, home, caring for her son, and repeating the cycle. She had no time for surprises, no time for friendship, and certainly no time for dreams beyond survival. But now Steve Jobs kept appearing, slipping gently into the rhythm of her life as though he belonged there. It started with small visits. Sometimes he brought coffee after her long shifts. Sometimes he brought groceries, though Michelle insisted she didn't need help. Once he even arrived with a bag of art supplies for Michael, who nearly jumped with joy. At first, Michelle tried to push him away politely, worried about what it meant to let a man like him into her humble life. But Steve wasn't pushy. He wasn't demanding. He came with genuine interest, like someone who wanted to be part of something real. One Saturday morning, Michelle was making pancakes for Michael when the doorbell rang. She opened it to find Steve holding a bag of fresh fruit. "I thought you might need some oranges," he said with a grin. Michelle shook her head, amused. "Do you always bring food everywhere you go?" "Only when I'm hoping to be invited to breakfast," he replied. Against her better judgment, she let him in. Soon, the three of them were seated together at the table, Michelle flipping pancakes, Michael laughing at Steve's silly attempts to toss fruit into the air and catch it. For the first time in years, their little home echoed with laughter that wasn't weighed down by exhaustion. Michelle noticed how natural Steve was with Michael. He never spoke down to him, never brushed him aside. Instead, he asked questions about school, listened carefully to his stories, and even praised his drawings taped on the fridge. Michael, who had always been shy around strangers, warmed to him quickly. Later that afternoon, after Michael had gone outside to play with neighbors, Michelle and Steve sat quietly on the balcony, sipping tea. "You don't have to keep coming here, you know," Michelle said softly. "I don't want you to feel obligated just because I drove you home that night." Steve looked at her, his expression serious. "I don't come here out of obligation, Michelle. I come because I want to. Do you know how long it's been since I sat in a kitchen and just talked, without anyone asking me for something? Do you know how long it's been since I laughed without thinking about business deals or company meetings?" Michelle lowered her eyes. "Your life must be very different from mine." "Yes," Steve admitted. "But different doesn't mean better. I have money, success, a big house. But when I go home, it's empty. No one's waiting at the table with homework. No one is asking me about museums or math. It's quiet, too quiet." His words touched something deep inside Michelle. She had always thought of her life as difficult, even lonely. Yet hearing him describe his emptiness made her realize she had something priceless. Love, warmth, and a sense of belonging with her son. A week later, Steve invited Michelle and Michael to his mansion for the first time. Michelle hesitated, feeling nervous about stepping into his world. But Michael was too excited to say no. "Mom, he said he has a library bigger than our whole apartment. We have to go." And so, one bright afternoon, they found themselves driving through the long gates of his estate. The house stood tall and beautiful, with glass windows that reflected the sunlight. Michael's mouth dropped open in awe. Inside, the mansion was grand, marble floors, chandeliers, polished furniture. Yet despite its beauty, it felt cold to Michelle, almost lifeless. There were no family photos on the walls, no signs of children's laughter, no warmth. Michael, however, was enchanted. He ran from room to room, exploring the library, the huge kitchen, the garden outside. Steve watched him with a smile, as though seeing his house come alive for the first time. "What do you think?" Steve asked Michelle quietly as they stood in the hallway. "It's beautiful," she admitted. "But also lonely." Steve's smile faded slightly. "That's exactly how I've always felt here. Lonely." Michelle met his eyes, and for a moment, she understood the weight he carried, the weight of success that didn't bring happiness. Over the next few weeks, their bond grew stronger. Steve started joining them for simple outings, grocery shopping, a walk in the park, even attending Michael's school play. For a man who had spent his life chasing business goals, these small, ordinary moments felt extraordinary. One evening, Michelle took them both to the park near her apartment. The air was crisp and children laughed as they chased each other across the grass. Michael dragged Steve toward the swings. "Push me higher," Michael shouted. Steve laughed, pushing him gently. "Hold on tight." Michelle watched from a distance, her heart swelling. She had never seen her son so happy with another adult, and she had never imagined Steve Jobs, the untouchable CEO, standing in a park, laughing like any ordinary man. As the sun set, Steve walked beside Michelle while Michael ran ahead. "You've given me something I didn't know I needed," he said softly. Michelle glanced at him. "What's that?" "A family," he replied simply. Her steps faltered. She wasn't sure what to say. The idea of letting someone into her life so deeply scared her. She had been hurt before. She had raised Michael alone, guarding her heart carefully. Yet something about Steve's sincerity made it hard to push him away. But not everything was easy. Some of Michelle's neighbors started whispering. They saw Steve's expensive car parked outside her apartment, saw him walking with her and Michael. Rumors spread. Some said she was chasing his money, others said he would never stay with someone like her. Michelle pretended not to hear, but late at night their words haunted her. One evening, as she folded laundry, she sighed heavily. Steve, sitting nearby, noticed. "What's wrong?" "People talk," Michelle admitted. "They say I don't belong in your world. That I'm only after what you have," Steve frowned. "Do you believe that?" "Of course not," she said quickly. "But it makes me wonder. Maybe they're right about one thing. Maybe I don't belong in your world." Steve leaned forward, his voice firm yet gentle. "Michelle, I don't want someone from my world. I have plenty of people there already. People who care about my money, my position. I come to you because you don't see me as a CEO. You see me as a man. That's rare, and I don't want to lose it." His words brought tears to her eyes, though she blinked them away. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that what they were building was real. One night, after a long dinner together, Michael fell asleep on the couch with his head resting on Steve's lap. Michelle watched silently as Steve gently adjusted a blanket over the boy. The sight was almost too much for her heart to hold. "You're good with him," she whispered. Steve looked up at her, his expression soft. "He deserves love, and so do you." Michelle turned away, not ready to face the emotions swelling inside her. But deep down she knew, whether she admitted it or not, that her life was changing. The lonely nights she once endured were no longer empty. Her small apartment, once quiet and tired, now echoed with laughter and warmth. And though the future was uncertain, one truth was becoming clear. The bond growing between them was stronger than she had ever expected. It wasn't just kindness anymore. It wasn't just friendship. It was something deeper, something that scared her as much as it comforted her. For the first time in years, Michelle allowed herself to hope. For weeks, Michelle Obama had felt a strange new warmth in her life. The laughter of her son mixed with the deep voice of Steve Jobs, and her once quiet home was now filled with conversations, meals shared together, and moments she never thought she would experience again. But as the days passed, whispers began to follow her like shadows. In her neighborhood, people noticed Steve's sleek car parked outside. They noticed him walking with her and Michael, sometimes carrying groceries, sometimes holding Michael's hand as though he were already family. At first, Michelle ignored the curious stares, but soon the whispers turned into words she could not unhear. "She's just using him. He'll leave her once he gets bored. What does a CEO want with a woman like her?" Michelle pretended to be strong, but late at night when Michael was asleep, those words echoed in her head. She had fought so hard to raise her son with dignity. She had survived alone. She did not want people to think she was chasing a man's fortune. One evening, after finishing her diner shift, Michelle walked home with heavy steps. She found Steve waiting outside her apartment with takeout boxes in his hands. "I thought we could have dinner together," he said cheerfully. But Michelle's smile didn't reach her eyes. Inside, as Michael rushed to the table excitedly, Michelle pulled Steve aside. "Steve, maybe you shouldn't come here so often," she said quietly. He frowned. "Why not?" "People are talking," she admitted, her voice trembling. "They think I'm with you for your money. They think you're only here for a short time. I don't want Michael to get attached and then lose you." Steve set the boxes down slowly, his expression softening. "Michelle, people will always talk. That's what they do. But do you care more about their voices than about what's real between us?" Her eyes filled with tears. I care about protecting my son. I've built his whole world on stability, even when I had nothing. I can't let him get hurt if this isn't real." Steve reached for her hand. "It is real. I know it's hard to believe, but I'm not here because of pity or convenience. I'm here because I want to be. Because you and Michael matter to me." She looked at him, torn between hope and fear. She wanted to believe him, but her heart had been broken before. The storm of doubt grew stronger when Steve invited Michelle and Michael to a charity event. "It's just a dinner," he explained. "I want you there with me. I want people to know you're important in my life." Michelle hesitated, but finally agreed. She wore her best dress, simple, navy blue, nothing fancy. Michael wore a little suit that Steve had given him as a gift. When they entered the grand hall filled with glittering chandeliers and polished tables, Michelle felt every eye turn to them. Some smiled politely. Others raised eyebrows. Michelle heard the quiet murmurs, the unspoken judgments. "That's Steve Jobs' date? She looks so ordinary. She doesn't belong here." Her face grew hot and she wanted to leave. But Steve stayed by her side the entire evening, introducing her confidently, speaking of her with respect. When people asked about her, he didn't hide her job at the diner or her role as a single mom. Instead, he said proudly, "Michelle is the strongest woman I know." Still, the stares cut deep. On the way home, Michelle was silent. Steve reached for her hand, but she pulled it away gently. "You don't see what I see," she whispered. "You're used to these people. I'm not. I don't belong in your world." He turned to her, his voice steady. "Michelle, I don't need someone from my world. I need someone real, and that's you." The doubts also reached Michael. At school, a few children teased him. "Your mom's with a rich guy? He'll leave soon." Michael came home with tears in his eyes. "Mom, is it true? Will Steve leave us?" Michelle knelt beside him, her heart breaking. "No, sweetheart. Steve cares about us, but even if he ever leaves, I will always be here. He'll never be alone." Steve overheard the conversation from the doorway. He walked in and placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly. "I promise." Michael looked up at him, searching his face for truth. Slowly, he nodded, though doubt still lingered. That night, after Michael had gone to bed, Michelle sat with Steve in the quiet living room. "Do you see what I mean? This is confusing for him. He doesn't know what to believe." Steve leaned closer. "Then let's show him. Let's show both of you that I'm here for the long run." Michelle's chest tightened. His words were strong, but her fear was stronger. Love had betrayed her before. Could she trust it again? One rainy evening, Michelle reached her breaking point. She had overheard two women at the diner laughing about her. "She's just a charity case," they said. The words stung like fire. That night, when Steve arrived with groceries, Michelle stopped him at the door. "Steve, maybe we need to end this," she said, her voice shaking. His face went pale. "End this? Why?" "Because I can't handle it. The whispers, the judgment, the fear. I thought I could, but I can't. And Michael, he doesn't deserve the confusion." Steve stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "Michelle, don't push me away because of what others say. Do you think I don't face criticism every day in business and life? People always talk. But you're the first person who's ever made me feel at home. Do you really want to give that up?" Tears slid down her cheeks. "I don't want to. But I'm scared." He gently took her hand, pressing it to his chest. "Then let me carry that fear with you. You don't have to do it alone anymore." For a long moment they stood there, the storm of rain pounding outside, the storm of doubt raging inside her heart. Slowly, Michelle leaned against him, allowing herself to feel the comfort of his presence. Maybe he was right. Maybe she didn't have to fight every battle alone. Days turned into weeks again. The doubts never fully disappeared, but Michelle noticed something. Steve never wavered. He came back again and again, not with grand gestures, but with consistency. He helped Michael with homework. He fixed the leaky faucet in her kitchen. He listened to her talk about long diner shifts without judgment. He was simply there. And sometimes late at night, Michelle allowed herself to imagine a future where this bond might grow stronger. A future where love did not end in heartbreak but in healing. The storm of doubt had not vanished. But little by little, she began to see a light breaking through the clouds. Winter melted into spring, and with the new season came small changes that Michelle Obama never thought she would see. Her apartment, once quiet except for her son's voice, now carried the steady rhythm of another presence. Steve Jobs had become part of their daily lives, not as a guest, not as a visitor, but as someone who belonged. The doubts Michelle once carried still whispered in her mind, but they grew softer with each passing week. What replaced them was something far stronger: trust. One Saturday morning, Michelle woke to the smell of pancakes. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. She rubbed her eyes and stepped into the kitchen to find Steve at the stove, wearing an apron that was clearly too small for him. Michael sat at the table laughing as Steve tried to flip pancakes without burning them. "Good morning," Steve said with a grin, though he looked a little embarrassed. "I thought I'd give you a break today." Michelle leaned against the doorway, smiling softly. "You'll make a mess of my kitchen." "Already did," Michael giggled, pointing to flowers scattered across the counter. Michelle shook her head but felt her heart warm. For years she had carried the weight of doing everything alone, but here was Steve standing in her kitchen, trying to learn, trying to share that load. It was clumsy, imperfect, but it was real. Later that day, Steve suggested they go to the park. The air was fresh, flowers were beginning to bloom, and children's laughter floated across the grass. Michael ran ahead, joining a group of kids playing soccer. Michelle sat on a bench watching him. Steve sat beside her, silent for a while before speaking. "You know, I used to think success meant filling my life with things. A bigger house, more cars, more recognition. But I never felt satisfied. Then I met you and I realized, maybe success is about filling your life with people who matter." Michelle glanced at him. His voice was steady, his eyes thoughtful. She had heard many promises in her life, but few had sounded as genuine as this. "You're not afraid?" she asked quietly. "Of what?" "Of living this kind of life." "Ordinary life," Steve smiled. "I'm not afraid. I've lived the extraordinary." It was empty. "I want this, the ordinary. The laughter, the late dinners, the homework, the quiet moments. That's where happiness is." For the first time, Michelle let herself believe that maybe he truly meant it. But their path to a new beginning was not without tests. One afternoon, Steve invited Michelle and Michael to an important business dinner. This time, Michelle did not feel as nervous as before. She wore a simple but elegant dress, and Michael held her hand proudly as they entered the hall. Some people still stared, but Michelle noticed something different. Steve no longer introduced her with hesitation. He spoke with pride. "This is Michelle. She and her son are the most important part of my life." Those words silenced many whispers, and though not everyone approved, Michelle realized it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the way Steve looked at her, not with pity or obligation, but with respect and love. At home, Michael continued to thrive with Steve's presence. The boy's grades improved, his confidence grew, and he laughed more freely than ever before. One evening, after finishing his homework, Michael looked at Steve and asked, "Will you always stay with us?" Steve knelt beside him. "Yes, Michael, I will. I'm not just here for today. I'm here for tomorrow and the day after and the day after that." Michael hugged him tightly, and Michelle, standing by the doorway, felt tears prick her eyes. She had never seen her son trust someone so completely. The turning point came one evening when Michelle's car broke down on her way to work. She stood by the roadside, frustrated and tired. Steve came immediately when she called. Instead of being annoyed or inconvenienced, he simply rolled up his sleeves and tried to help until a mechanic arrived. On the drive back, Michelle sighed. "This is why I never let myself dream too much. Life always reminds me of how fragile things are. One broken car and everything feels like it's falling apart." Steve reached for her hand, holding it firmly. "That's the difference now, Michelle. You don't have to handle it alone anymore. Life will always throw problems, but we'll face them together." Her heart tightened at his words. For years, she had been the only one holding everything together. Now she was learning to share that weight. It was new. It was scary. But it was also beautiful. Months passed, and soon summer arrived. One evening, Steve invited Michelle and Michael to his mansion for a small gathering. Not a business event, not a charity dinner, just a quiet evening with close friends. Michelle noticed how different the house felt now. Where it once seemed cold and lifeless, it now carried signs of warmth. Michael's drawings hung on the refrigerator in Steve's grand kitchen. A few toys lay scattered in the living room. There was laughter in the halls. At one point, Michelle stood on the balcony looking out over the garden. Steve joined her, slipping his hand into hers. "Do you remember the first night we met?" he asked. Michelle laughed softly. "Of course. You were drunk in the back of my car. And you looked at me like a person, Steve said, not like a headline. That night changed everything for me. It changed everything for me too, Michelle admitted. I just didn't know it then. Steve turned to her, his eyes serious. Michelle, I can't promise life will be perfect. I can't promise people will stop talking. But I can promise this, I will stand by you through every storm, through every doubt. I want a life with you and Michael. Not as a guest, not as a visitor, but as family. Michelle's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not from fear. They were from relief, from hope, from love she had long buried. From that day forward, their lives began to weave together in ways that felt natural, unforced. Steve still ran his company, but he made time to pick up Michael from school, to share dinners, to attend parent meetings. Michelle still worked, but now she did it with a lighter heart, knowing she had someone who supported her. Their world was not grand or glamorous, but it was filled with small joys, family breakfasts, evening walks, late-night talks. And for Michelle, those simple moments meant more than any riches could offer. She had once believed her life would always be lonely. That love was something she could never trust again. But fate had surprised her in the most unexpected way. By driving a drunk CEO home one rainy night, she had opened a door to a future she never dared to imagine. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Michelle leaning against Steve, Michael asleep beside them, Michelle whispered, "Do you think this will last?" Steve kissed her forehead gently. "It's already lasting. This isn't just a chapter, Michelle. It's our story now, and it's only the beginning." Michelle closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his words sink in. For the first time in years, she didn't feel lonely. She didn't feel afraid. Her life had changed forever, and she wouldn't have it any other way.